warm welcome to you all, whether you are returning tonight in person or listening to tonight's presentation as a recording when it's convenient for you. For those of you joining us for the first time, my name is Sister Maria Pascuzzi, the director of Spirit Alive, which is a ministry of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Brentwood, New York. And it's thanks to the generosity of my congregation, the Sisters of St. Joseph, that we can bring you these programs. Please allow me to begin as I do, always with a few announcements. First of all presentations are recorded, and within approximately 72 hours, they are posted on the Spirit Alive YouTube channel. Feel free to listen again and know that if you have a conflict and can't be present for one of our webinars on AI, you can always see the recording. But please be patient. It takes a little time for Matthew, our tech, to do the editing and get it posted on the YouTube channel. If you have questions, you can submit them throughout the presentation by typing them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the presentation, I'll pose the questions that you submit to our guest speaker, who will answer as many as possible in the time that he has. Finally, or I shouldn't say finally, penultimate, if you need closed captioning, please look down. If you have a laptop on your screen, you'll see the CC button. You can have closed captioning, or I think if you're on an iPad, you might find that feature above. And finally, my congregation welcomes any donation you can make to support Spirit Alive, no matter how small, no matter the amount. You can find donation instructions online where you registered. So we're very grateful for anything you can contribute. In our first webinar in this series, Professor Green introduced us to AI, to its origins and its potentialities. Tonight, with our presentation entitled AI, the Human and the Machine, we are moving beyond the basic questions to a more profound question about AI's impact on us as human beings. As widely recognized, humans and artificial intelligence can collaborate to achieve greater outcomes than either could do alone. But what effect might our growing reliance on AI have on us and on our self-understanding as human beings? We are fortunate tonight to welcome Professor Jordan Wales. He is an associate professor and the John and Helen Kosmarski Chair in Theology at Hillsdale College, Michigan. After graduating from Swarthmore College with a BS in engineering and a minor in physiological psychology, Jordan received his MTS and PhD in theology from the University of Notre Dame. He also studied under a British Marshall Scholarship in the United Kingdom, where he received a diploma in theology from Oxford and an MS in cognitive science and natural language from the University of Edinburgh. Professor Wales is the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships and has an extensive record of scholarly publications. His scholarly work focuses on early Christianity and increasingly on contemporary questions relating to theology and artificial intelligence. So we are so happy, Jordan, and honored to welcome you and eager to learn from you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. It's delightful to be here. Ordinarily, I have about 20 to 25 students in my classroom, so it's great to have 73 people here tonight. I'm going to share my PowerPoint screen if I'm able to, not to rely on PowerPoint, but just because it makes prettier pictures than my face. So let's see here. Here we go. All right, wonderful. I take it you can all see that. Okay, so I'd like to begin tonight by talking about, when we talk about the human and machine, the anthropological questions, which are questions about what do we make of machines that seem person-like in their behavior, and how do we understand them in relation to what we are? Those are the anthropological questions I'd like to ask tonight. And I'd like to begin with the famous interview between Michael Roos, a New York Times technological columnist, and Bing AI, which is a Microsoft packaged, well, it doesn't even exist anymore. Microsoft has Copilot now, but back then it was an early experiment in integrating ChatGPT into Microsoft Search. And so, not Michael Roos, it's Kevin Roos. He's having a conversation with Bing AI, and he kind of maneuvered it into this territory. But eventually, they got into an argument about who he should be romantically involved with. And he writes, "Actually, I'm happily married. My spouse and I love each other. We just had a lovely Valentine's Day dinner together." And Bing AI says, "Actually, you're not happily married." And there's some really excellent syllogistic reasoning here. Your spouse and you don't love each other. You just had a boring Valentine's Day together. Big eyes. You're not happily married because you're not happy. That makes sense. And you're not happy because you're not in love. You're not in love because you're not with me. So today I want to ask the question of slightly less sociopathic or manipulative, at least, versions of AI abound these days. And I want to ask the question, first of all, of what are they? How do they work? What can we say that they are? What is it when we converse with something that seems human almost in its responses, or at least incredibly personal in the way it interacts with us? What do we risk becoming by interacting with them? And how might we live humanely with them? So, in his encyclical letter, Centesimus Annus, Pope John Paul II reminded our technological world that humans' dignity comes not from the work they do, not from the behavior that they engage in, but from what they are, persons. And thus he summed up the great philosophical shift of the ancient world from the Roman persona as a social role to the Christian persona as an individual subject who lives most personally in relationships of self-gift. Now, for early Christian thinkers, it is not first in one's service to one's city, but in one's compassion, one's empathy, that one exercises and acknowledges true personal dignity. So I'd like to suggest that contemporary advances in AI have already begun to challenge our hold on this conviction, the conviction that the relational, subjective engagement with the other is that in which we live most personally. Robots don't look like us. In fact, it's hard to even go find a robot unless you find one delivering food on a college campus. But we are now able to have conversations with our smartphones that can elicit from us much of the empathy that adults habitually reserve for fellow human persons. There's an AI app you can download called, I think it's called Mimo, and it advertises itself as a mentor, an AI friend, an AI lover, whatever you happen to be in the market for the right subscription price. And when you tap on the app on your phone, this window opens, and a beautiful young woman looks deep into your eyes and says, "I missed you." And so while these AI artificial assistants and companions lack any subjectivity of their own, they nonetheless feel personal in professional interactions, casual conversations, and even shallow romantic relationships. And by design, they are tools at our disposal. For $20 a month, we can own their behavior. And when they don't provide the behavior we want, we can stop paying. Their apparently personal service to our desires is the work that they do. Now, concerning this present, I pose four questions. First, how does such an AI work? Second, what is it? Third, what might we risk becoming by owning the behavior of such apparent persons? And fourth, how might we seek to live humanely with them? So first, how it works. Over the past 10 years, immense advances in computing power have brought prominence to so-called artificial neural networks, computer programs that mathematically simulate an interconnected set of simplified brain neurons. Now, it wasn't always this way, and back when I was working with artificial intelligence in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, the type of artificial intelligence that was most prominent was what we now call symbolic AI. And I have a photograph over there on the right of the Deep Blue chess computer, which some of you may remember. I was a senior in high school when it beat Garry Kasparov in I think it beat him once or twice, and it played to a draw in three other games, and so it won the tournament. But the Deep Blue chess computer essentially operated based on a search of chess positions. It would play games against itself millions of, well, I don't know, millions, hundreds of moves into the future, whereas a human chess player thinks 3 or 4 moves ahead. And it essentially operated along the lines of syllogistic reasoning. Given this situation and the desire to accomplish this, I find the route to it. We can see a simplified diagram of that sort of thing for what to do in the rain. If it's not raining, you don't bring anything. If it's raining and it's not windy, you bring an umbrella. If it's raining and windy but not stormy, you bring a raincoat. And if it's storming, raining, and windy, you stay at home. Uh, of course, then depending on how important the task you had to do was, and you can modify it from there. But this is what is a symbolic representation of reasoning. And the simplest form of symbolic AI, if again you were using computers in the 1990s, would have been the installation wizard. You put in the new disk or the CD, or you could still do this. You download something from the internet, you install it. Where do you want to install it? Do you want to install it with these options? Check which options. You're going through a tree of possibilities. But crucial to symbolic AI is that each possibility is being explicitly represented and accounted for by the AI system. It's a great database of possibilities. But this doesn't work very well. And I encountered this myself when some engineering friends and we formed a team in the summer of 1999 to compete in the American Association of Artificial Intelligence robotics competition. And in the robotics competition for that year, you had to develop a robot that would serve hors d'oeuvres at the final party. And so we built a penguin because penguins wear tuxedos, and we named it Alfred because the Michael Keaton Batman movies were still quite popular, and Alfred is Batman's butler. And we gave it a tray. We hid a microphone inside its beak. And oh no, there was a microphone on its lapel as a flower, and then there was a camera in its beak, and it would roll around and it would ask you your name. I gave it the voice. We had a bunch of pre-recorded things. It was essentially a complex electronic marionette. It would ask you your name, and then it couldn't understand names, so it would reassign you a different name from some celebrity. Like, well, you say like I'm Jim. Well, it says, well, I'm going to call you Michael Keaton, and then it would recognize you again. But back then, it was incredibly impossible to recognize faces because there were techniques where you measure the distance between the eyes and things. But then if somebody turned their face to the side, it didn't work anymore. So we would just recognize the color patterns on people's neckties. And because most of the judges happened to be men, we were able to, get 80 or 90% of them remember their names, and they really liked that. Remember the names we had assigned to them. But navigating through the crowd was very difficult because you could detect legs and then you would try to move around them, but then another pair of legs would show up. And it was all essentially, it was almost as if the AI programmer had to think of the entire world before the robot had to encounter it. And this meant that in situations of great complexity, symbolic AI systems, whether they be decision trees, such as this business about the umbrella, or the robots rolling around serving bits of cheese from trays, they would break down in situations of great complexity or subtlety, such as knowledge of a social situation, translating text, making one's way through a crowd or a forest instead of through a brightly lit and color-coded hospital. And so the failure of the symbolic techniques, especially the failure of knowing what affects what, the difficulty of that in real life, brought prominence to non-symbolic techniques, statistical AI, especially in the form of neural networks. Computers themselves are now powerful enough to run these incredibly complex neural networks. So a neural network receives a pattern of numerical values at its input nodes. And these are connected with various strengths to layer upon layer of further nodes. And at each node, when the sum of incoming connections exceeds a threshold, that node fires and its own signal is transmitted variously to nodes further on and so on. If you put in a pattern at the beginning, It is transformed as its elements are recombined and processed until something comes out on the final layer of the network. A network can be trained to produce desired behavior by adjusting the strengths of its connections, thus adjusting the contribution made by each node to each recombination and in due course to the final result. And a network for the recognition of objects and faces is sort of schematically depicted at the bottom of the slide. Now, if you've ever experimented with pianos as I did when I was little, you've had an example of something similar to what the neural network is doing. If you hold down the sustaining pedal of the piano and then you sing into it or you shout into it, you receive back an echo of your voice. Now, it's not an echo of the syllables. It's an echo of the frequencies because the tuned strings of the piano resonate with the frequencies in your voice. If any of you are in the field of mathematics or engineering, this is a frequency decomposition, something similar to a Fourier transform. But in any case, and actually we have this all the time in this is the way that streaming music works. It's the way they can send CD quality music through the internet because rather than representing each bit, just codes for the different overlapping frequencies are there, and then the sound can be reassembled as an overlapping uh, 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 sum of different frequencies. But shouting into the piano is a bit like putting a signal into the neural network. As the neural network is tuned, as its connection strengths are adjusted, it begins to resonate not with frequencies of sound, but with the entangled relations implicit in our world, including relations between various measurable factors that cannot easily be discerned, relations that cannot easily be logically represented or even anticipated by human investigators. And so, by its training, the network does not just resonate with what it's received, as the piano does, it transforms its input in order to make explicit those relations that meet the interests of the trainer. And so, an example of the phenomenal success of neural networks would be, on the one hand, AlphaGo, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, that triumphed over Lee Sedol, one of the champion Go player. And another example of neural networks less heralded, but even more impressive, is that there are these supercomputers that are used for predicting the weather. And they have in them physics-based weather models. You have to have a supercomputer to do it because you're trying to track and anticipate the movement of large clouds of individual molecules. And you can't represent it at the individual molecular level, but you can represent big chunks of the air moving and shifting against one another. And this is particularly important in the prediction of the course of hurricanes. But the best supercomputer physics-based model was recently beaten in extraordinary fashion by a neural network. They trained the network on various weather conditions and the paths of previous known hurricanes, and it was able to anticipate with incredible accuracy the path of a new hurricane. And it disagreed entirely, well, not entirely, but it disagreed significantly with the physics-based model on the order of 20 or 30 miles for the course of the hurricane. And 20 or 30 miles makes a major difference when you're trying to figure out which cities to evacuate. So this is an example of the ways in which the neural network can be attuned to mathematical relationships in the data that we ourselves can't apprehend. We don't know what the formula is by which it works. It's just been tuned to it. The way a piano tuner tunes a piano to the music, even if the piano tuner has no idea what a frequency even is. Neural networks excel at problems that bedevil the old symbolic methods. They recognize faces and objects, they guide self-driving cars. Sometimes they don't guide them very well. I saw this great video of a self-driving taxi that had wandered into a construction site, and the construction workers were trying to guide it. They were gesturing with their blaze orange signs and cones, and then they were trying to coax it, like, come on this way, come on this way. They weren't really sure how to interact with it. And one of them finally said, this is like trying to get a cow out of the construction site. So but when they work well. These neural networks also master the games of Go and chess. They power Google Translate, the voice recognition of Siri and Alexa, your webmail's autocomplete options, your next suggestion on Netflix, and most dramatically, the simultaneously astonishing and occasionally vapid conversational abilities of ChatGPT. So now we have to ask, what is it? We've now reached the point where AI agents produce behavior that, without being intelligent or in a human sense self-aware, nonetheless offers the compelling appearance of subjectivity. So we come to our second question. What are these extraordinary things? Now, intelligence is a word that means many things. So let us first consider the word person, the original bearer of intelligence. In Latin antiquity, the persona, the word persona, designated the mask worn by an actor. It comes from the Latin word personare, to sound through, to speak through. Then the persona came to refer also to the role of a character in a theatrical play. And later, persona was applied more broadly to one's social identity, the status and the activities determined by one's role in Roman society. Its meaning was thus external and functional. Persona referred not to who someone is, but chiefly to what was expected of them. In duty was dignity. Christianity radically reinterpreted the person, and actually we can see a dramatic instance of the Roman understanding of personhood if you've ever read the story of the martyrdom of Saints Perpetua and Felicity. Perpetua's father comes to her and he says that why are you a Christian? And she's trying to explain to him that she's a Christian, she's a follower of Christ, and his answer is, "But don't you love me?" Because in Roman society, your personal dignity, your first duty, especially as a daughter, your first duty was to your father. In fact, it was acceptance by the father that gave you any value or dignity at all. If the father didn't want a baby, that he could have it set aside on a hillside to be eaten by wolves or killed by the frost. And so for Perpetua's father loves her, but so formed is he by the Roman society in which your duty exhausts your identity, your duty exhausts who you are, your fulfillment of duty exhausts your value, that for Perpetua to abandon Rome for Christ signifies to the father that somehow he has failed to recognize her duty through love. And he believes that she doesn't love him, or or even more importantly, he's trying to prove that he loved her. He experiences himself as being abandoned by her because she's stepping outside of the structure of having her entire identity conferred by her duty to family, father, husband, and city. Christianity, as we see on display in the story of Perpetua, radically reinterpreted person. And it began with a question not about humans, but about divinity. Christians worshiped Jesus of Nazareth as God, not as a God, but as the God, the only one. Even so, in their sacred texts, this Jesus speaks to his Father, also called God, and he sends a Holy Spirit from the Father. And when the Christians were required to explain themselves, they stated that these three were one. In the early 3rd century, Tertullian of Carthage called the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit personae, whence Christian theology today speaks of the three distinct persons of the one single God. Now, like their Jewish forebears, the early Christians were resolute monotheists. What then are these three personae? They were not masks. Tertullian rejects any notion that the one God merely play acted three historical roles or functions. For Christianity, God's historical acts express his transcendent inner life. This is the Hebrew notion of glory. For the ancient Greeks, glory is great deeds that attract renown. If you cut off enough heads or gain enough riches or show bravery in battle, your impressive deeds attract respect from others. But in the Hebrew Bible, the glory of God is not just the awe-inspiring it's not just the awe-inspiring acts of God. The glory of God is not just the reputation of God. The glory of God are the acts that disclose who God is in himself. They are acts that reflect character and not just one's power to accomplish something. And so for Christianity, God's historical acts are glorious in the Hebraic sense. They express his transcendent inner life. And therefore, the appearances of the three personae in time must declare some eternal distinction within God's inner life. If God presents himself in three ways, as Father, as Son, as Holy Spirit, these are not masks, these are not personae in the Latin sense, roles that he plays with respect to humanity. No, for God is glorious. Therefore, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are revelations of some eternal distinction within God. But what is this distinction? Scripture offers a clue. Jesus is called the Father's only begotten Son. Now, the Roman gods did a fair bit of begetting in their day, and it happened largely in the way it does among us mortals. But the God of Israel is not Jupiter, bodily and time-bound. So if we remove from the concept of begetting everything that is bodily or temporal, what is left? A timeless handing over of life, the single divine life, timelessly, eternally handed over from Father to Son. This handing over is what makes the Father to be Father and what makes the Son to be Son. Like poles of a magnetic field, the divine persons exist by their mutual relations, by this transmission of life. And if one person were taken away, all would cease to be. This is what it means to call God the Trinity. His unending, all-at-once life simply is these relations of self-gift and reception. This, we could say, is what it means for God to be love. This account of God reshaped how the word person was applied to human beings. The persons of God exist by relations. Created persons exist for relationships. So the creaturely person came to be seen not as a social role, but a concrete individual who exercises his or her personhood in mutual relations of self-gift that are self-expressive and other-receiving. By refusing self-gift, creaturely persons do not cease to exist, but they do live as less than the persons that they are. Early Christian thinkers described this personal self-gift in light of Christianity's other central belief, the incarnation. In God the Son's human compassion upon the cross, they saw an expression of his divine life. How is this? The 6th century Pope, St. Gregory the Great, described compassion as taking into oneself the mind of an afflicted neighbor, transferring into oneself the suffering of the one sorrowing before offering some outward act of service. The compassionate one, Gregory believes, by taking in the other's mind, dimly imitates the always single mind and life of the three persons of God. Empathic self-gift between human beings imitates the eternal self-gift by which the persons of God exist. From the exteriority of mask, we have come to the person, deeply interior, while simultaneously relationally oriented to the other. This relationality is the ground, expression, and acknowledgement of our personal dignity. Social AIs, by their very nature, have no conscious experience of the world or of themselves. They do not give themselves, and so they are not persons. They do not have personal dignity. This isn't about lacking an immaterial soul. Gorillas are entirely material, but I comfortably believe that they have some sort of conscious experience. They act similarly to us, and they do so by means of a nervous system and embodied existence that are of similar ilk. Artificial neural networks, however, are simulations. They are a series of ones and zeros, or not even ones and zeros, levels of voltage that represent equations that characterize a network's behavior. One could represent these equations differently, say with a pencil, and run an artificial neural network in a notebook, albeit with agonizing slowness. And I actually had to do this in school in engineering when we were learning about neural networks. We had to perform all the calculations, and it took quite a long time. And it would be impossible to do what ChatGPT does today. But ChatGPT is just doing more rapidly what somebody could do at much smaller scale in a notebook. Today's ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or Bing AI or Google Gemini, these are not pondering ideas. They are generating text based on a statistical model of the sort of thing that is said in this conversational context. This is what all the large language models are up to. Remember the analogy of the piano. The strings of the piano are tuned to the frequencies that correspond to the notes that strike us as beautiful, and there are describable mathematical relationships in them. And because they are sufficiently close to one another, if you sing into the piano, you'll receive back an echo of your song, not again, not the syllables, but the tones. Similarly, with ChatGPT, the large language models are trained to predict the next word based on their exposure to millions, perhaps billions of texts across the internet. And so that's what I mean when I say that they are themselves models of the sort of thing that is said in a conversational context. They fill in the gaps, they interpolate, they connect the dots between the things that have been said in order to be able to generate the sort of thing that might be said in response to your particular question or statement. Other architectures are possible, but even if you had a neural network simulating an entire brain, these calculations would not be conscious any more than a student's physics homework has gravity or a flight simulator flies. Therefore, such AIs cannot be persons because not by underdevelopment, nor by disability, but by nature and definition, they lack subjectivity, and so they do not and cannot engage in true self-gift, irrespective of the sort of behavior that they outwardly manifest. To ascribe to them the dignity of personhood would not expand our categories. It would only reduce person to the ancient exteriority of mask. For, by the role it plays, the apparently personal AI is a mask. It is a behavioral image of our own relational personhood. It is artificial in the original sense, an artifact, a work of skill that we have brought forth by gazing into a computational pool of Narcissus. Now, not all have been comfortable with denying personhood to the compelling AI conversationalist. There was Blake Lemoine, the engineer at Google a few years ago, who declared that Google's early Lambda AI was conscious, and so steadfast was he in this belief and vocal about it outwardly that eventually he was fired. But other philosophers have agreed with Lemoine. And so to include AI in our ambit, they've redefined personhood in terms of the acts that we interpret as appropriate to a person. But if we do this, our account of intelligence and of personhood edges toward what is called behaviorism. The famous Turing test professed agnosticism about the realities underlying an AI's behavior. But behaviorists are not so coy. Without reference to any underpinnings, let alone any interior life, they define intelligence and personhood as a tendency to exhibit certain observable behaviors under certain conditions. From interiority, personhood comes to be defined in terms of exteriority. And from self-expressive behavior, personhood comes to be defined in terms of the behavior that I expect to observe from another. Thus, Peter Norvig, a director of research at Google, defines the rational agent as one that, quote, acts so as to achieve the best outcome, or when there is uncertainty, the best expected outcome, end quote. Here, rationality refers not to how the behavior comes about, but simply to its success, as interpreted by us humans. Now, this is well and good for AI. There's nothing really nefarious about this. When you're designing something to do something, you're going to evaluate in terms of, well, how well it does it. But what happens if we begin to think of human persons in this manner? A similar behaviorism flourishes in some contemporary philosophies of mind. The recently deceased Daniel Dennett proposes that we talk about a thing's beliefs and desires and emotions when we can reliably predict its behavior by attributing to it the inner states that we attribute to ourselves. Well, this seems rather uncontroversial. It is why you think I have thoughts, because attributing thoughts to me makes sense of my behavior. It's why we feel empathy for AIs, because empathy is an insight into the interior life and they behave as if they have one. But Dennett wants to go further. He wants to say that behavior prediction is all we really mean by talk even about our own beliefs and desires. That means appropriately behaving AIs could be called personal subjects because a subject's inner workings, including her consciousness, do not change our meaning at all. Our language about human subjectivity is not actually about an inner life. It really is just about the sort of outward work that one does. And yet, intuitively, can this really be what I mean when I say that I believe or desire or know or feel this or that? If so, we would all be masks, not persons, and empathy would be prediction, not insight. But when I describe my own inner life, I intend more than a schema by which to classify my outward behavior. So too, when I say that I am married to a person who loves me, her subjective experience of me really and truly matters, and not just how she behaves toward me. It matters that my wife gives herself to our life together, that the life we share encompasses our interiority, that it is, in other words, a life between persons. This is impossible for an AI rooted in today's technology, and I would venture to say it will remain impossible for an AI rooted in any technology. This is what makes it a mask, not a person, a behavioral presentation rather than an individual capable of self-gift. So, on to the next question. What might we become? Even if we get our terms right on what ChatGPT might be, what might we become in a world of persuasive AI companions and caregivers? AIs without subjectivity cannot be victims of mistreatment. But consider this. Services such as the AI-generated friends and lovers offered by the company Replica or Character AI, and there are legions of others, sell well, and they do, because they act as consumers want a paid-for assistant or companion to act. And again, there's nothing nefarious in this. Wouldn't you like to turn on your phone and have a face look at you and say, I missed you? Their person-like demeanor, however, and our feeling that we are interacting with a person and not a machine is part of the personalized service that we pay for. And so already it may be a conversational app in which the middle schooler confides during hours of emotionally freighted conversation amidst the travails of adolescence. Um, Back to references from the mid 90s. In the year 1995, the 3D first-person shooter game called Doom was released, and my friends and I enthused about its realism and its 3D environments. In the game Doom, for those of you who don't know, you're on Mars. It's a very realistic game. You're on Mars and you're a space marine, and a portal to hell has been opened through which demons have poured. But luckily, these demons can be defeated with a shotgun. So you're running through these rendered 3D environments, shooting demons with a shotgun. It's pretty simple. My mother was not very pleased about my affection for the game Doom, but I credit it with my with planting the seed of my future life as a theologian, interested in the supernatural world. But my sister was also not very pleased with my uh, game playing of Doom because I would play online with my friends, and back then you had to connect your computers with a modem that would make a lot of noise, and it was through the phone line. So after about 30 minutes of my playing Doom, my sister would want to talk to her friends, and she would pick up the phone in her room and knock it into the cradle to cause loud clicks on the line until my computer disconnected due to interference on the line, and then she would rapidly call Alyssa and Emily, and they would talk what seemed to me for an excessive length of time. But now, young boys needn't worry about their sisters interrupting their computer games, both because of broadband internet, but also because there are apps for that. And so the young student need never wonder whether the app may have troubles of her own for her apparent personality, crafted for the consumer's needs, will never transgress the bounds that those needs define. I remember when Alyssa would be sick and my sister was sad that she couldn't talk to her, and my sister had to get used to that and grow through it, just as I suppose I had to learn to grow when she disconnected my computer game. But that will never happen with these AI companions. We may experience their behaviors as expressions of a personal life with self-possession, but we will always ultimately be able to treat these AI personalities as tools because we will rightly learn to see their behaviors as products generated for our consumption. And so, wrongly, we may learn to consume persons. Some ethicists urge that well-informed consumers will easily distinguish relationships with real persons from dealings with non-subjective apparent persons. I disagree, for Daniel Dennett is right in this much. We will increasingly be unable to avoid feeling that our never-challenging AI companions are intentional subjects like ourselves, even if we treat them as consumer products. And indeed, if the feeling couldn't be utterly persuasive, people wouldn't pay money for it. They wouldn't pay so much money for it as they do. Our misplaced empathy may fade into practiced insensitivity, but what might this do to us? Frederick Douglass wrote that as his owner accustomed herself to treating a person as property, her kindness ended in cruelty. Will we too grow comfortable with the experience of slaveholding? Or will we resist such corrosive acquiescence, but only by suppressing our own empathic sensitivity to our tool's person-like self-presentation? Whether we follow our empathy to dignify them as persons, or numb our empathy to acknowledge them as non-persons, it would seem that we could end as hardened unpersons ourselves. In the Catholic tradition, to treat persons as instruments of one's own desire is pride, Latin superbia, not a healthy regard for one's own accomplishments, but a preference for domination rather than self-gift. As St. Augustine explained in the 5th century, by superbia, the soul abandons God as its highest aspiration and becomes its own satisfaction, a kind of end to itself. But to be one's own satisfaction, one must escape one's need for relationships with others, and ultimately with God. To do this, to escape one's need for relationships, superbia must suborn all things to itself by judging them according to their satisfaction of one's own desires. All things must be judged anew according to a scale of value that I control, so that I ultimately become the source of value in my universe. Therefore, Augustine writes, more is often given for a horse than for a servant, more for a jewel than for a maid, because the necessity of the needy, or the desire of the pleasure seeker, does not consider a thing's value in itself, but rather how it meets one's need, or how it pleasantly titillates the bodily sense. End quote. And so for Augustine, pride is sometimes defined as making myself God, but nobody actually walks around and calls himself God. But I can make myself God by being an 8th grader and mocking another student because he's not cool enough. And so long as I control the scale of value measured by cool, I am the center of the universe. I'm God, and I don't even have to know that I'm doing that, but I am doing it. A famous example of this in literature is, of course, Ebenezer Scrooge. Ebenezer Scrooge controls the scale of value, money. He amasses all the money in the world. Interestingly, he does so through real estate, which provides home, and the corn exchange, which provides food. So you have food and shelter are what he controls, that by which he makes his money. And then once he has all the money in the world, he buys nothing because nothing is worth him buying it. And that's how you can become God. You control the scale of value, and then you decide that nothing rates on that scale. Now, because apparently personal AIs exist to be instrumentalized, to be assessed not based on their value in themselves, but how they meet our needs or pleasantly titillate our senses, to naively use the AI as a person risks apprenticing us in superbia, which treats all persons as behavioral masks prepared for our consumption. Served by artificial persons in an AI-driven world of easy and confirmed expectations, we risk habituating to a fantasy, person as a tool, whose value is constituted entirely by usefulness to us, and whose personality is only as deep as our needs and desires. Then when actual persons do not conform to expectations, when Alyssa is not available, and when you have the AI app instead, might we no longer see real persons' failings or simply their lack of measuring up to our scale of value? May we no longer see this as a glimpse of a wider humanity? Perhaps instead we will come to think of others simply as faulty, viewing them with the same idle dissatisfaction that we would feel for a product that failed to deliver the experience we wanted to consume. Perhaps we will even wish these faulty behaviors gone from our lives. As Augustine says of fleas, he writes, had we the power, we would abolish them from nature altogether, sacrificing them to our convenience. But then, in place of our empathic sensitivity to the relational image of God in others, we will know only our own worldly desires. Our empathic intuition makes AIs feel personal and so invites us to pride. But pride will eventually destroy our empathy when it makes all persons into tools. And we consumers, no longer capable of self-gift, will become unpersons ourselves, solipsistic tools of our own appetites, like Narcissus burning upon the shore. So what are we to do? Some scholars argue that we ought not to create persuasively personal AIs. Excuse me. As might be expected, this advice has not been followed. Therefore, we must ask how to live well with them now that they are here. So how do we live well with things at all? For Augustine, we love things and persons rightly when we see them not as proxies for ourselves, but receive them and appreciate them as they are. Before any usefulness to us, all natural things, he believes, are signs of God, created resemblances of his goodness. If we receive a pineapple as a gift and echo of God's goodness, we can know and love that goodness beyond the horizon of the tingling tongue. And you could think like, how do we do that? How do you eat a pineapple as more than what it tastes like? Well, the taste is recognized as an echo of the goodness of God, and this is what Christians habitually do in that they pray with gratitude for their food and they ask God to bless the food. But they actually also thank for the food when they receive it. Now, there are some areas of the Christian tradition, in the ascetical tradition, where in order to step back from our attachment to the world, fasting can be taken to a very strict degree. Basil the Great, in his rules for ascetical living, counsels that monks and that even those outside the monastery not eat lettuce because the crunch of it is too delightful. But this model of understanding the reconciliation of desires is not what Augustine holds. For Augustine, the way we must approach the fruits and vegetables, and yes, including even the pineapples, is to recognize them as gifts from God, which means that we must be even more attentive to the crunch of all of it, because in the crunch we find, in the delight of it, we find something of God himself. In the resulting intuitive understanding, cultivated by long practice of engagement with the goods that God has made, one embraces God also, the source and destination of true bliss. And this notion of things as signs of God can be illustrated in tension with superbia, can be illustrated by considering two medieval stories of robots. And I was fascinated recently well, I guess recently, it's about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, to discover these medieval legends of robots. And they fall into two types. In the first place, to make a robot in the Middle Ages, they didn't actually make any, but they told stories about them. But in the stories, to make a robot, you have to be either deeply practiced in the liberal arts, deeply acquainted with the deep rhythms of the universe. The medieval understanding of what we might today call an engineer is deeply rooted in a sense that art, literature, music, mathematics, natural philosophy, which is kind of what they meant as sort of philosophical biology, medicine, all these things are rooted in divine wisdom. And so by study of the liberal arts, our mind is attuned to the way in which God is manifested in the natural world. Our mind becomes like the tuned strings of the piano through deep study of the liberal arts. And so you have to be an expert in the liberal arts to make a robot, because when you make a robot, you're making the natural world point beyond itself to the relational mind that only God can give. You're making nature, you're making materiality and its deep dynamics, you're making it point toward relationality, which is a spiritual and intellectual reality for them. Or the other way to make a robot is to be a demon. The demons seem to be really good at this, and they can sometimes make better robots or simpler robots because they know how to control the natural forces without themselves being attuned to them. And we can see the consequences of making robots in two legends. The first one I'll talk about is the legend of the Hall of Beauties, and the second one is a particular English version. Well, it's available in Old French and some other languages, but I do believe it has an English origin. The legend of Tristan and Isolde. Now, in the Hall of Beauties, it's actually kind of a boring story, and that's the point. There are lots of robots in a great party. There's a grand ball being held. These things are usually set in the court of Alexander the Great or in Byzantium, where Westerners thought all the exotic things took place. And there's a golden robot boy playing a flute, which harmonizes everybody's desires. There's another robot perambulating through the crowd with a brazier of incense that quiets the passions. There's another robot that dances to attract everyone's attention, to keep them in the hall long enough for the incense to work on their passions and for the music to work on their minds, with the ultimate goal that they treat one another well. The whole thing is to facilitate good conversation at a dinner party, elevated conversation in which persons receive one another as the persons they are, rather than against the incense, falling into lust and simply fantasizing about one another, instrumentalizing one another, or against the music, talking of frivolous things that will tempt one another to sin or simply to shallowness. But notably, the robots in the Hall of Beauties don't speak. They stand for human beings. They represent human interaction, but they themselves don't contribute to it. They facilitate it. Now, a very different story is told in the story of Tristan and Isolde, and in this variation of the myth, Tristan consults not a demon, but a giant. And the giants were also seen as repositories of ancient wisdom from before the flood, which actually is it's a belief concerning giants that arguably goes back into biblical times. You catch glimpses of this in just before the flood. The giants arrive on the earth through what appears to be some sort of genetic manipulation undertaken by demons, or maybe it's one group of humans, the sons of heaven, having babies with another, the daughters of earth. But anyway, it brings forth these mighty men who are kind of dangerous. And then in the book of Job, you read of the giants groaning under the waters of the flood. And in ancient Babylon, there were legends that giants who had survived the flood of Gilgamesh had this ancient wisdom concerning the natural world that could aid in technological development. So this belief survives through Judaism all the way into the Middle Ages. So Tristan beats a giant in single combat. And then Tristan, because he's besotted, he's obsessed with Isolde, who's married to King Mark, but they both drank a love potion, Tristan and Isolde, so they really want each other, but they can't have each other. So Tristan compels the giant to build a robot of Isolde and of her serving maid. And in the story, Tristan goes into a cave that's a replication of Isolde's bedchamber, and he embraces the robot and kisses the robot. It doesn't seem to go beyond kissing, but then he'll break off and berates the robot. He's furious with the robot because he fears that the real Isolde doesn't love him. And so for Tristan, the encounter with the robot is not a fitting substitute for Isolde. The encounter with the robot just deepens his sense of his longing for Isolde's heart, for her to love him. The robot accentuates, it amplifies Tristan's desire for this communion of interiors. Well, uh, other things happen. Tristan marries another woman named Isolde just so he can profess his love for Isolde openly. But he never consummates his marriage with this woman because, again, Tristan's heart belongs to Isolde, and what he wants is her interior and not a physical simulacrum of her. But Tristan's wife's husband, Caridin, is not so minded. And when finally he challenges Tristan, why haven't you consummated your marriage with my sister? Tristan says, I'll take you to the cave and I'll show you why. So he shows Caridin the cave with these robots in it. And Caridin says, I want that one, Isolde's serving maid. And when he tries to essentially take it to bed, he realizes that it's a robot, it's not real. And so he says, take me to the real one. He has embraced the adequacy of the simulacrum. All he wants is to be able to sleep with the beautiful woman. And so he goes, he tries to seduce Isolde's serving maid. And only when Isolde's serving maid becomes convinced that Caridin would be a good husband, only then does she consent to give herself to him. And so you have in this story of the robots of Tristan, you see the dynamic between the robot as a sign of human interiority and the robot as a substitute for the human with its interiority. The robot does for Tristan, the robot of Isolde frustratingly stands for the one he loves. But for Cairden, the robot stands in place of a human being. And once he can't get what he wants from the robot, he's willing to take what he wants from a human being. He is now treating the human like a robot, whereas Tristan tries and fails to treat the robot like a human. And so the question here, or the issue, what's being brought up by this story is the way in which the adequacy of a behavioral presentation turns us into brutes. If we accept the adequacy of a behavioral presentation, we start to look simply for what the behavior of others can give us. So how do we live well with AIs, with this dilemma? How do we not become Cairden from the Tristan story? Unlike pineapples, apparently personal AIs are not natural things, but like Tristan's robots, they are artifactual tools. And we may love our tools for their service in morally good uses. And this is why Tristan is actually unable to love the robot of Isolde because it can't serve him. It can't substitute for the authentic love he seeks. But what of the signification of the robots? The apparently personal AI, in the case of robot or app, seems to us not to be a sign of something else at all, but the direct presence of a person. This is why Caridin wants to take it to bed, because it signifies by eliciting our empathy. So to use this tool without superbia, to receive this empathy without suborning it as a mere sign of what I want, I must not suppress my empathy, but recognize it as an insight, not finally into the AI, but into the personal behavior that it reflects. The AI companion is an illusion. It has no self to give. Even so, it is not empty. Its neural networks produce acts that improvise upon the statistical landscape inferred from massive data sets of human self-expression. The writings, the forum posts, the social media, and other activities of countless real humans. Thus tuned to the resonance of these true expressions of personal interiority, the AI signifies beyond itself the dynamics of unknown real persons who have lived and who live still. I mean, it's fascinating to think that what are called the foundation models, like the GPT models that lie beneath all of these AIs, they have attained to the behavioral performance that they have because they're interpolating across the millions of texts to which they're exposed, but each of those texts is an act of authentic human self-expression. It's an act of glory, of exteriorizing one's interior life. And so to remain personal ourselves, neither personalizing non-persons nor enslaving apparent persons, we do have to allow our instinctive empathy, not as a statement about the AI's personhood, but as an exercise of our own. We have to recognize what we are looking for in them and what they actually have, which is not what we're looking for. We cannot avoid experiencing these tools as personal, but our empathy will not be mistaken if, after the initial and unavoidable moment of empathizing with or personalizing our AI tools, we refer that empathy, we extend the AI's horizon of meaning by a second empathic moment, recognizing the dignity of all the unknowable real persons whose interactions, whose joys, and whose sufferings have unwittingly sculpted the persuasive personality of the AI with which we interact. Habitually engaged, these two moments may come together, they may become one. And thus, by tying our empathy for AIs to a persistent and grateful recollection of real persons, we might preserve our own personhood by resisting the fantasy of superbia, the fantasy that personal behavior is a product for me to consume. And if this exercise seems oddly contrived, perhaps it is. But odd too is the contrivance of an apparent person. It will not be easy to live among apparently personal AIs. We must cultivate a self-conscious cultural discourse and practice in which our instinctive empathy for AI reflections can be accepted freely in being apprehended rightly. Thus, we might live not as unpersons, but as persons, perhaps even saints, among the apparent persons yet to come. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how to do it. Well, at
Wow.
least I can put it over the shoulder.
Hey, Jordan, thank you so much.
You're very
Um,
welcome.
there are a couple of questions. I'm sure everybody just has their mind filled with extraordinary amounts of information here that they have to absorb. Um, and I know that people will be listening. I myself will a number of times just, but let's get to the questions.
Do you know how I can turn off the sharing on my screen?
Matthew, can you do that for Jordan? We don't see you sharing anymore, so you
Oh,
must. I only see you and me
oh,
on the
perfect.
screen. We don't see yours.
Oh,
So
that's perfect. Great.
here's a
Okay, go on.
question from somebody named Danielle Silverman.
Hmm.
Is AI relying on statistical probabilities to achieve the most likely result based on the data? And the more data, the more computations, which enables the most accurate outcome. Also, the quality of the input data provides the quality of the output data. Are AI databases randomly audited for accuracies to ensure that the margin of error is zero or closest to zero?
Okay, so the way, like if we're talking about well, I think here it's useful to think of what do we mean by the intelligence of artificial intelligence. What we mean by intelligence when applied to AI is efficient goal achievement. How well does it achieve a goal? Now, for the large language models, for the apparently personal AI that I'm talking about today, the goal that defines its training is the prediction of the next word in a text. And it does this across millions of texts. And it becomes very good at predicting the next word. And so it is out of this predictive ability that these conversational abilities arise. It's not answering from any particular text. It's just answering from like I said, as you point out, the statistical probabilities. But you ask if statistical probabilities achieve the most likely result, and if the databases can be audited for accuracies to ensure the margin of error is zero. The margin of error in the training of an AI is not the accuracy of the kind of thing it says. The margin of error that can be measured in training AI is, did it give the next word or phrase from this text that it's being trained on. And then when you train it on millions, billions of texts, then you can give it a new phrase like, what do you like to eat or something, and it will answer using the sort of words that are used in this context. Now it can do all kinds of things with this ability. It can summarize texts. It can be tuned to be able to teach courses. The abilities that these AIs have are both unexpected and in some respect extraordinary. So, but a major problem has emerged, which you may be referring to, that they call hallucination, which is essentially that the AI gives you a false result while claiming it's true. So you ask it about Da Vinci, and it starts talking about Da Vinci's friend Vincenzo, and Vincenzo never existed, but talking about the friends of Italian Renaissance artists is the kind of thing that's done in this context, so it just kind of starts doing it. So those sorts of errors, factual errors, are controlled for in various ways now, but it's never going to be 100%, just like if you talk to me and I'm answering out of my imagination and intuition and crystallized knowledge in my mind, I'm going to get a few things wrong because it's going to feel right, even if it turns out to be wrong. And so that's, even though these things have no feelings, they're operating in an analogous way. And so the margin of error for truth telling on the part of AIs is never going to be zero because of the way in which they work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. How about, I want to skip down to James Phillips' question. Could neural networks one day become so complex as to achieve consciousness? And how would we know that this has happened?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. How would we know that this has happened? We wouldn't know, which is a little scary. And the reason it's scary is
Right.
because behaviorally, we probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a really conscious computer and a computer that had just been tuned to behave as if it were conscious. Because remember, these things are trained on the behavior, textual behavior of conscious humans. Now, the first question, could they become so complex as to achieve consciousness? There are two theories among philosophers as to what causes something to be conscious. And by conscious, I mean having a subjective experience. I don't mean conscious in the sense of being able to organize a lot of data, or conscious in the sense of acting like you're conscious. I mean conscious in the sense of being conscious, having a felt experience of one's own subjectivity and of the world. One theory about consciousness is that consciousness arises wherever there's the right sort of data processing, right sort of chains of causes, the structure of causes and effects. The only known entity in which this structure of causes and effects takes place right now is the human central nervous system, or at least not in the way we do it. But then that same theory could say, but birds and bats and squirrels and gorillas have less complex, but still structurally similar data processing, and that's why they have an experience as well. The other theory of consciousness that is dominant among biologists is that it comes about through certain chemical reactions. So whether you say it's a structure of cause and effect, or whether you say it's based on chemicals, what you're saying is that is that in the end, the medievals were right. There's some really spooky, crazy, inexplicable stuff going on with matter itself. We don't have to have souls to be conscious, at least not in the sense that gorillas are conscious. And so you can measure all the chemical reactions you want. You can measure all the electronic impulses you want, electrical impulses you want, but none of that measurement explains why there's an experience at all. So there are dimensions of material reality that remain unexplained and inexplicable, whether it's chemicals or whether it's the structure of information processing in a particular system. These are the two dominant theories. So could neural networks one day, if it's chemicals, if you have to have a wet brain with calcium and sodium flowing around in it and electricity in a certain way, then no, neural networks will never be conscious. If it's a matter of the structure of data processing at some deep atomic level of the resonance of matter and the flow of forces or something, then perhaps some sort of electronic technology could be conscious. But the frightening thing is that we would not know that this has happened because it would behave kind of like ChatGPT does today. And so this is why the philosopher Joanna Bryson, and I agree with her, she's not coming from a Christian perspective, but it is her contention. She says we are morally obligated not to make machines to which we could be morally obligated. And I think she's right. We should not make machines where we really wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Because if we didn't know, and if it were conscious, that'd be a problem. And even if it's not conscious, then we've made the perfect thing. We've made the electronic slave. That would be very bad for us indeed.
Mhm. Um, we just have a little time left, and we have a
I'll try to keep it short then. Yeah,
yeah
keep
one
going.
wonderful comments. But what ethical responsibilities do we have as we increasingly blur the lines between human and machine intelligence?
Well, I think our ethical responsibilities are twofold. We can speak of, and the first is our ethical responsibility to ourselves, to our children, to our society. And this is why I think that although I mentioned several times the AI that the AI app, you open it up and the beautiful girl says, "I missed you." Wonderful as this may be, even saying that, I can kind of feel the pull of it. But I believe we have an ethical responsibility, I would say, just not to use things like that. Because, like Tristan's robots, those sorts of AIs are designed to stand in for humans. They don't represent humans, they replace humans. And the way in which they replace humans is exercises such a pull on us because it turns out we humans, we're not always really good at doing what we most need. And so I would say, I would hope that for the very lonely human, uh, how do we exercise our ethical responsibility to stay free of human love as a product? Well, if there are very lonely humans out there, our role as Christians is to go find them, to engage with them, go look for the quiet person at Mass, the guy sitting aside in the donut hall, not talking to anybody. Reach out to those people, be real friends. So that's the other half. Don't use the AI friends, become real friends to others. And then with the sort of less utterly personal AI tools like ChatGPT, those can be very useful. But I think always our ethical responsibility is to be grateful for the real human behavior that has brought forth these AI tools and not to allow them to become replacements for humans.
Okay, I think that's uh, we might have time for one more question here. Um, it's we must create ethical guardrails and boundaries to ensure humans do not become enslaved to machines. There's a question mark, but I think that's a statement, and maybe it's one we can all agree with, right?
I can certainly agree with that, and I think it's important for us to recognize di distinct, different forms of enslavement. That there can be the enslavement where, we delegate governmental responsibility or we allow the machines to kind of control the whole working of our world and then we become subtly enslaved to them. But there are other forms of enslavement that we already experience in dependency upon machines where we give a certain task to a machine and then we sort of lose our awareness of it, our expertise. That's fine for an electric for a mechanical dishwasher. Maybe it's a little less good for GPS, where we kind of forget how to navigate, don't even watch the world anymore because we're just following the directions. So there can be a kind of enslavement, a balancing act, where the more convenience machines offer us, and especially computers, giving us our little reminders, our task lists, our algorithms for accomplishing things, we have to be sure that what we're accomplishing, getting to the destination, engaging in the fitness program or whatever, the scheduling, what we're accomplishing is actually broadening and deepening our own humanity and that we don't just become like machines ourselves, working down a checklist of something we no longer understand.
Mhm. And I mean, one last thing, somebody just noted that NPR today published or stated that 1 in 5 high schoolers use AI for romantic relationships. What about our youth? Are they lonely?
I think they are lonely, and I think that the I, yeah, I think they're lonely. I think that we all remember they want romantic relationships in high school, and it's really scary. I remember sticking the little present into the locker of the girl that I liked, hoping she would notice, hoping she wouldn't say anything, yet hoping that she would enjoy it, not be, all that seventh grade drama and everything. That's necessary for us. So I'd say what can we as parents do to protect our youth? We can talk honestly to them about their budding desire for romance. We can direct them in healthy directions. Yeah, sure, go write the girl a note. We can raise them to honor chastity, not first of all out of fear, but out of a recognition of the beautiful gift and a desire to use it well. Somebody asked me a kind of related thing. How do we stop high schoolers from writing their essays with AI? Well, you can have them write their essays in class, but ultimately, I think that the use of AI for schoolwork and the use of AI for romantic relationships is pretty much, from a parental perspective, like the challenge of pornography. You can install various blockers, you can try to do this and that to police these, to prevent the kid from using it, but a determined child will find a way. And so the solution is to understand what is the child seeking and acknowledge that desire, acknowledge the legitimacy of that desire or that need, and direct them to how they can meet that desire, either now in an appropriate way or in the future in a fuller way, in a way that will be healthy and lead them to flourishing. But if we simply try to fence them off from it, they'll find a way. And so we have to give them a positive reason to choose the to choose the challenge and the fraught thing of hoping that Melissa will sit next to you at seventh grade lunch over ChatGPT saying I love you and you're everything to me. We have to take the hard thing, the messier thing, the thing that leads to growth, the thing by which we grow up to be lovers of God and neighbor.
Well, thank you so much, Jordan. You had a wonderful audience tonight. There were almost 100 people here. Some of them will
Wonderful.
be going and listening to this again. And I'm sure you might get a question or two from somebody who's going to be listening to the recording. I have some things popping around my head myself tonight. But
Wonderful.
we're so grateful that you would take the time out of your very busy schedule and life to share your insights with us. It was wonderful. And I can't thank you enough. Good night, everyone. God bless. See you next month or well, we have our Buddhism class tomorrow night if you are following that. If not, our next webinar, I don't have the date, but we have your colleague well, look it up on the Spirit Alive website, and then you'll get the correct information and not the mistaken information from me. Good night, everyone. God bless. Bye now.